The autumn wind howled through the Carpathian valleys, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and distant rain. Viktor pressed his worn coat tighter against his chest as he walked beside Elena down the narrow mountain path. Her breathing was labored, each step seeming to drain what little color remained in her pale cheeks. He wanted to take her hand, to offer some comfort, but the distance between them felt greater than the mere foot of space that separated their bodies. They had been engaged once, promised to each other since childhood, but 3 months ago, Elena had broken that promise. She had returned his ring without explanation, her eyes filled with a sorrow he could not understand. Now here he was, accompanying her to see a physician rumored to possess knowledge beyond the reach of ordinary medicine. The village doctor had given up on Elena weeks ago, muttering about wasting illnesses and God's will. But Elena's mother had heard whispers of a learned man who kept a practice in the old manor house high in the mountains, a place locals avoided after dark. When Elena asked Viktor to escort her, he could not refuse. Whatever had broken between them, he still carried the weight of what they had been. The path wound upward through skeletal trees that clawed at the darkening sky. Viktor glanced at Elena, noting how her once bright eyes had grown hollow, how her skin seemed almost translucent in the fading light. She had always been delicate, but now she appeared as fragile as spun glass. The illness had come upon her suddenly, starting with fatigue and progressing to something more sinister. She could barely eat. She woke screaming from nightmares she refused to describe, and there were marks on her throat, 2 small wounds that never quite healed. They rounded a bend and the manor came into view. It was a structure of dark stone and pointed arches, its windows glowing with warm candlelight that seemed somehow cold against the gathering dusk. Ivy climbed its walls like grasping fingers, and gargoyles leered from the cornices with expressions of eternal hunger. Viktor felt his stomach tighten with unease. This place felt wrong, tainted by something he could not name. Elena stopped, swaying slightly on her feet. Viktor reached out to steady her, his hands finding her shoulders. She was so thin now. He could feel her bones beneath the fabric of her dress. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "We can turn back. We can find another way." Elena shook her head, a ghost of determination flickering across her features. "There is no other way," she whispered. "This is my last hope, Viktor. Please understand." He wanted to argue, to insist they return to the village, but the desperation in her voice silenced him. Instead, he nodded and offered his arm. She took it gratefully, leaning against him as they approached the heavy wooden door. Viktor raised the iron knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the courtyard like a death knell. Moments passed in silence. Then, slowly, the door opened. A tall figure stood in the threshold, backlit by the warm glow of the interior. As Viktor's eyes adjusted, he saw a man of aristocratic bearing, perhaps 40 years of age, with sharp features and penetrating dark eyes. He wore elegant black clothing that seemed out of place in these rural mountains, and his pale hands were long-fingered and graceful. "Miss Elena, I presume," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured, with an accent Viktor could not quite place. "I am Dr. Corvinus. I have been expecting you." Elena nodded weakly. "Thank you for seeing me, Doctor. This is Viktor. He kindly agreed to escort me." Dr. Corvinus's gaze shifted to Viktor, and for a moment something flickered in those dark eyes, something ancient and knowing that made Viktor's skin crawl. Then the doctor smiled, a gesture that did not reach his eyes, and stepped aside. "Of course, please both of you come in from the cold." They entered a grand hall, lit by candelabras that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes and noble gatherings hung between suits of armor that stood like silent sentinels. The air smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something else, something faintly metallic that Viktor could not identify. Dr. Corvinus led them through the hall and into a study lined with books and strange instruments. A fire burned in the hearth, yet the room remained cold. "Please sit, Miss Elena," the doctor said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Viktor remained standing near the door, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "Doctor." Corvinus moved to a cabinet and retrieved a leather case, setting it on the table beside Elena's chair. He opened it to reveal various glass vials and metal tools that glinted in the firelight. "Your mother wrote to me about your condition," Dr. Corvinus said as he began his examination. "She mentioned the fatigue, the nightmares, the inability to keep down food, and these marks on your throat." He tilted Elena's head gently to one side, his fingers tracing the two small wounds. Viktor saw him lean closer, inhaling deeply, as if scenting something in her blood. The gesture was intimate in a way that made Viktor's hands clench into fists. "How long have you had these wounds?" the doctor asked. "They appeared 2 months ago," Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will not heal. Sometimes they bleed in the night." Dr. Corvinus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And your appetite? When did food begin to turn your stomach?" "Around the same time. Nothing tastes right anymore. Everything is ash in my mouth." The doctor stepped back, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied Elena with an intensity that made Viktor deeply uncomfortable. There was something predatory in the way he looked at her, as if she were a rare specimen rather than a suffering patient. "Miss Elena, I believe I can help you," Dr. Corvinus said finally. "But my treatment is unconventional. It requires trust and commitment. The process will take time, and you must come here regularly for it to be effective." Elena's eyes brightened with fragile hope. "Whatever is necessary, doctor. I will do anything to be well again." "Good," Dr. Corvinus said softly. "We will begin immediately. Viktor, you may wait here. This first treatment requires privacy." Viktor stepped forward instinctively. "I would prefer to stay with her." The doctor's smile was patient but firm. "I understand your concern, young man, but what I do requires concentration and an atmosphere of calm. I assure you Miss Elena will be perfectly safe. You have my word as a physician." Elena reached out and touched Viktor's arm. "It is all right," she said. "I trust him. Please wait for me." Every instinct screamed at Viktor to refuse, to take Elena and flee this cursed place. But she was looking at him with such pleading in her eyes that he found himself nodding. Dr. Corvinus guided Elena to an inner door, and Viktor caught a glimpse of a dimly lit chamber beyond before the door closed, leaving him alone in the study. He paced the room, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him like a shroud. The books on the shelves bore titles in languages he did not recognize. The instruments on the desk looked more like devices of torture than medical tools, and there was that smell, growing stronger now, the metallic scent of blood. Time stretched. Viktor moved to the window and looked out at the darkening landscape. Night had fallen completely now, and the moon hung low and bloated in the sky. In the distance, wolves howled, their cries echoing through the mountains. He thought of Elena in that inner chamber with the strange doctor, and his unease deepened into genuine fear. When the door finally opened, Elena emerged looking somehow different. Her cheeks held a faint flush of color, and her eyes seemed brighter, more alert. But there was also something else, something Viktor could not name, a subtle change in the way she held herself, as if she had taken her first steps into a world he could not follow. Dr. Corvinus stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture that seemed both protective and possessive. "I have given Miss Elena a treatment that will strengthen her blood," he explained. "She must return in 3 days for the next application. With time and continued care, I believe we can restore her to full health." "Thank you, Doctor," Elena said, and Viktor heard genuine warmth in her voice, a lightness that had been absent for months. "I already feel better." Viktor forced himself to smile, though his gut churned with suspicion. "We should return before full dark," he said. "Your mother will be worried." They said their farewells, and Dr. Corvinus walked them to the door. As they stepped out into the cold night air, Viktor glanced back and saw the doctor standing in the threshold, his dark eyes fixed on Elena, with an expression of satisfaction that made Viktor's blood run cold. The door closed, and they began their descent down the mountain path. Elena walked with more energy now, her steps no longer faltering. She smiled at Viktor, and he saw that her teeth seemed somehow sharper in the moonlight. "He was remarkable," she said softly. "I have not felt this alive in months." "What did he do to you?" Viktor asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "He gave me a tonic," she replied, "and he spoke to me about my condition. He understands things that other doctors cannot. He says my illness is not of the body but of the spirit. He says I have been chosen. Chosen for what? Viktor demanded, but Elena only smiled and looked up at the moon. They walked the rest of the way in silence. When they reached Elena's home, a modest cottage on the edge of the village, Viktor waited as she knocked on the door. Her mother answered, relief flooding her careworn face as she pulled Elena into an embrace. "Thank you for bringing her safely, Viktor," the older woman said. "Did the doctor offer any hope?" "He believes he can cure her," Viktor replied, though the words tasted like lies. "She must return in 3 days." Elena's mother crossed herself. "God be praised. We will take her then." Elena turned to Viktor, and for a moment their eyes met. He saw something in her gaze, a mixture of gratitude and goodbye, as if she were already slipping away from him into some distant realm he could never reach. "Thank you, Viktor," she said softly, "for everything." Then she went inside and the door closed, leaving Viktor alone in the street with the moon overhead and the wind whispering through the eaves. He walked back to his own dwelling, a small house he shared with his aging father, but sleep eluded him. He lay awake, listening to the wolves in the mountains and wondering what treatment Dr. Corvinus had administered, what poison had been introduced into Elena's veins disguised as medicine. 3 days later, Elena returned to the manor. Viktor offered again to accompany her, but this time she refused, saying her mother would go with her. A week passed, then another. Each time Elena visited the doctor, she returned stronger, more vibrant, but also more changed. The marks on her throat remained, and Viktor began to notice other things. She avoided sunlight, claiming it hurt her eyes. She stopped attending church, saying the incense made her ill. And she no longer ate the meals her mother prepared, instead disappearing each night and returning before dawn, with color in her cheeks and a secret smile on her lips. Viktor's suspicions grew into certainty. He began to research in the old books kept in the village church, dusty tomes that spoke of creatures of the night, of the undead who sustained themselves on the blood of the living, vampires. The word itself seemed ridiculous, the stuff of peasant superstition, yet everything he read matched Elena's symptoms with terrifying precision. He confronted her one evening as she prepared for another visit to the manor. "Elena," he said, grasping her arm as she walked past him in the village square, "you must stop seeing that doctor. He is not what he claims to be." She pulled away, her eyes flashing with anger. "You do not understand, Viktor. Dr. Corvinus is saving my life. He is stealing your soul," Viktor shot back. "Can you not see what is happening to you? You are becoming something other than human." Elena's expression softened, and for a moment he saw a glimmer of the girl he had loved. "Oh, Viktor," she said sadly, "you always were too rooted in the old ways, too afraid of anything that challenged your narrow understanding of the world. Dr. Corvinus has shown me that there is more to existence than this brief mortal span. He has offered me a gift." "A gift," Viktor repeated, his voice hollow. "Elena, he is a vampire. Those stories the old women tell are true. He is feeding on you, changing you." She smiled then, and Viktor saw that her canine teeth had indeed grown longer, sharper. "I know what he is," she said calmly, "and I have accepted it. Soon I will be like him, free from sickness, free from death, free from the limitations of this weak flesh." Viktor stared at her, horror and heartbreak warring in his chest. "Why did you break our engagement?" he asked quietly. "Was it because of him?" "I broke it to spare you," Elena replied. "I knew what was coming. I knew I would have to make a choice, and I did not want you bound to a creature of the night. You deserve a normal life, Viktor. A wife who can give you children and grow old beside you. I cannot be that woman anymore." She turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. Viktor watched her go, feeling as though his heart had been torn from his chest. In the weeks that followed, he tried to focus on his work, to forget Elena and the darkness that had claimed her, but it was impossible. She haunted his dreams, appearing as she had been before the illness, before the doctor, her laughter bright and her touch warm. Then, 2 months after that first visit to the manor, a messenger arrived at Viktor's door bearing an envelope of fine black paper, sealed with red wax. His hands trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The script was elegant, written in a hand he did not recognize. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Count Dracula and Miss Elena Vasile. The ceremony will take place at Castle Dracula on the night of the new moon. Your presence is requested as a gesture of closure and respect for the past." Viktor read the words 3 times before their meaning fully penetrated his shock. Count Dracula. Dr. Corvinus had been Count Dracula himself, the legendary vampire lord, the master of darkness, and Elena was to become his bride. Rage and anguish flooded through Viktor in equal measure. He had delivered her to this fate. He had stood by and watched as she was seduced into damnation, and now she would be bound to that monster for all eternity, while he remained behind, mortal and powerless. But as he stood there, clutching the invitation, a new emotion took root in his heart: determination. If there was even the slightest chance of saving Elena, of breaking whatever spell Dracula had woven around her, he would take it. He would go to that cursed castle. He would witness the ceremony. And if an opportunity presented itself, he would fight for the woman he loved, even if it cost him his life. Viktor began to prepare. He visited the old priest who kept the church, seeking knowledge of how to combat the undead. The priest, a wizened man who had seen too many winters, listened gravely to Viktor's tale, and then led him to a hidden vault beneath the church. There, wrapped in consecrated cloth, were weapons blessed for battle against darkness. Holy water in vials, wooden stakes carved from trees that grew in hallowed ground, a silver crucifix that had belonged to a saint. "Take these," the priest said, pressing them into Viktor's hands, "but know that faith is your greatest weapon. If your heart wavers, if you doubt, the vampire will sense it and destroy you. You must be absolutely certain of your purpose." "I am certain," Viktor replied. "I love her. I will not let her be lost without a fight." The priest made the sign of the cross over Viktor's head. "Then go with God, my son, and may he have mercy on your soul." The night of the new moon arrived, cold and moonless, the sky thick with clouds that obscured the stars. Viktor dressed in dark clothing and concealed his weapons beneath his coat. The invitation had included a map showing the way to Castle Dracula, a fortress even deeper in the mountains than the manor where Elena had received her treatments. As Viktor set out on the treacherous path, he felt the weight of his task settling upon him like a physical burden. The castle loomed out of the darkness, like a monument to despair, its towers piercing the sky, its walls black as pitch. Torches burned in iron sconces along the battlements, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent life. Viktor approached the main gate, which stood open as if in invitation. No guards challenged him. No servants appeared to question his presence. The castle itself seemed to be waiting, hungry and patient. He entered a vast courtyard paved with ancient stones. In the center stood a fountain, but instead of water, it appeared to flow with something dark and thick. Viktor's stomach turned as he realized it was blood. He forced himself to look away and continued toward the main entrance, a towering door carved with scenes of battle and conquest. Inside, the castle was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, all decorated with a grotesque opulence. Tapestries depicted scenes of violence and seduction. Candles burned in chandeliers fashioned from twisted metal that resembled tortured bodies. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and decay, and Viktor heard distant music, a haunting melody played on strings that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He followed the sound through winding passages until he reached a pair of double doors that stood partially open. Beyond them lay a great hall, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with columns carved to resemble coiling serpents. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, stood an altar draped in black velvet, and there, waiting in the candlelight, was Elena. She wore a gown of deep crimson that clung to her now voluptuous form, her skin pale as alabaster, her hair unbound and cascading over her shoulders like a dark waterfall. She was beautiful in a way that transcended human beauty, terrible and perfect as a statue carved by a mad artist. And beside her, dressed in black finery that spoke of centuries of power and darkness, stood Count Dracula. He was taller than Viktor remembered, his presence commanding and absolute. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, with features that seemed carved from marble. His eyes burned with a crimson light, and when he smiled, his fangs gleamed like ivory daggers. He held Elena's hand in his, a gesture of possession that made Viktor's blood boil. Other figures stood in the shadows around the hall, pale faces with glowing eyes. The vampire court assembled to witness their master's wedding. Viktor felt their attention shift to him as he stepped into the hall, felt their hunger and amusement. He was prey that had wandered into the den of predators, and they savored his fear. "Ah," Dracula said, his voice resonating through the hall like distant thunder. "Our final guest has arrived. Welcome, Viktor. I am pleased you accepted my invitation. It seemed only fitting that you should witness this moment, given your role in bringing my beloved to me." Viktor's hands clenched at his sides, feeling the wooden stake pressed against his ribs beneath his coat. Elena turned to look at him, and he saw no recognition in her eyes, only a cold beauty that shattered his heart. "Elena," he called out, his voice cracking, "please, this is not you. Fight what he has done to you. Come back to me." She tilted her head, a gesture eerily reminiscent of a bird studying an insect. "Viktor," she said, and her voice was like music played in a minor key. "You should not have come. There is nothing here for you but death." Dracula laughed, a sound that held centuries of mockery. "She speaks the truth, mortal. Elena belongs to the night now. She has drunk of my blood and I of hers. We are bound by ties stronger than any human marriage vow. Tonight we formalize that bond before my assembled court. You may watch, or you may leave. But know that if you attempt to interfere, I will tear out your throat and let my bride drink her fill of your blood as a wedding gift." Viktor's hand moved toward the stake, but before he could draw it, 3 vampires materialized beside him, their movements too fast to follow. They seized his arms with inhuman strength, holding him immobile. He struggled, but it was like fighting against iron chains. Dracula stepped forward, descending from the dais with predatory grace. He circled Viktor slowly, his red eyes studying him with clinical interest. "You love her still," the vampire lord said. "I can smell it on you, the pathetic desperation of mortal affection. Do you wish to know what she has told me, Viktor? She says you were kind but dull, predictable as the seasons. She says she longed for passion, for darkness, for experiences beyond the narrow confines of your peasant existence. I have given her eternity. What could you possibly offer that compares to that?" Viktor forced himself to meet those terrible eyes. "I offer her humanity," he said through gritted teeth. "I offer her a soul. You have stolen that from her." Dracula's smile widened. "So certain of your righteousness. Tell me, Viktor, did you ever truly know Elena? Did you ever ask her what she desired, what dreams filled her sleeping mind? Or did you simply assume she would be content as your wife, bearing your children, cooking your meals, fading into obscurity? I saw what she truly was the moment I met her, a creature of darkness waiting to be born. I merely provided the catalyst." He gestured, and the vampires released Viktor, though they remained close, ready to seize him again if he made any threatening move. Dracula returned to the altar, taking Elena's hand once more. "Let us begin," he said. A figure emerged from the shadows, an ancient vampire dressed in robes that might once have been those of a priest. His voice, when he spoke, was like wind through a crypt, reciting vows in a language Viktor did not understand, but which filled him with primal dread. Dracula and Elena repeated the words, their voices intertwining in a dark harmony. Viktor watched, helpless and broken, as the woman he loved pledged herself to eternal darkness. He saw Dracula produce a knife of black metal and draw it across his own wrist. Dark blood welled up, and Elena leaned forward without hesitation, pressing her lips to the wound and drinking deeply. The assembled vampires hissed in approval, a sound like serpents awakening. When Elena lifted her head, her eyes burned red, and Viktor saw the last remnants of the girl he had known vanish like smoke. Dracula then took the knife and held it to Elena's throat, not cutting, but marking her as his. She closed her eyes in ecstasy as he whispered words of possession into her ear. The ceremony concluded, and Dracula pulled Elena into a kiss that seemed to consume her. The vampire court applauded, their pale hands striking together with sounds like cracking bones. Viktor's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Dracula released Elena, and turned his attention back to Viktor. "You have witnessed what you came to see, mortal. Now leave my castle and speak nothing of what has occurred here. If you value your miserable life, forget Elena. She is mine now and forever." Viktor forced himself to stand, his body shaking with grief and rage. He looked at Elena one last time, hoping against hope to see some flicker of the woman she had been. But she returned his gaze with indifference, already lost to him, already transformed into something that had never truly been human. He turned and walked from the hall, the laughter of vampires echoing in his ears. The castle corridors seemed to twist around him, leading him inexorably toward the exit. He emerged into the courtyard as the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern horizon. The vampires would retreat to their crypts now, hiding from the sun that could destroy them. Viktor stumbled down the mountain path, his heart hollow, his purpose shattered. He had failed. Elena was lost, and it was his own fault. If he had been more attentive, more passionate, more everything she needed, perhaps she would never have fallen prey to Dracula's seduction. If he had never taken her to that cursed manor, never left her alone with that monster, she would still be human. As the sun rose over the Carpathian Mountains, Viktor collapsed beside the path and wept until he had no tears left. Then he rose and continued walking, not toward his village, but away from it, away from everything he had known. He could not return to that life. He could not pretend that everything was normal when the woman he loved had become a bride of darkness. And deep in his heart, beneath the grief and self-recrimination, a small ember of determination still glowed. This was not over. Elena might be lost for now, but perhaps there was still a way to save her, to break Dracula's hold and restore her humanity. He would find that way, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost him. Viktor walked into the sunrise, leaving behind the shadows of Castle Dracula, but carrying within him the memory of Elena's empty eyes and the terrible knowledge that he had helped seal her fate. His regret was a physical weight, crushing and inescapable, but he would learn to carry it. He would transform it into purpose. Somewhere ahead lay answers. Somewhere ahead lay redemption. He would find both or die trying. Viktor wandered for weeks through villages and towns, following rumors of scholars who studied the occult, priests who had battled demons, hunters who knew the ways of vampires. His money ran out quickly, and he took work where he could find it, laboring in fields and stables, sleeping in barns and under bridges. His hands grew calloused, his face gaunt, but his determination never wavered. Every night he dreamed of Elena, sometimes as she had been, laughing in the sunlight, sometimes as she was now, her eyes burning red with unholy hunger. In a mountain monastery 3 weeks' journey from his home, Viktor finally found what he sought. The monks there kept a library of forbidden texts, books that the church had collected over centuries from heretics and practitioners of dark arts. The abbot, a severe man with iron-grey hair and eyes that had witnessed too much suffering, listened to Viktor's story without interruption. When Viktor finished, the abbot sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "What you ask is dangerous beyond measure," the abbot said finally. "To break a vampire's hold over one who has been turned requires either the destruction of the master vampire or a ritual of such profound faith that few mortals possess the spiritual strength to perform it. Count Dracula is ancient, powerful, beyond your comprehension. He has walked this earth for centuries, and many have tried to destroy him. All have failed." Viktor leaned forward, desperation evident in every line of his body. There must be a way. If faith is what is required, then I will find that faith. I will do whatever is necessary. The abbot studied him with an expression that might have been pity. "Faith is not something you find, young man. It is something you possess or do not possess. It must be absolute, unwavering, pure as snow. The moment you doubt, the moment you hesitate, the darkness will exploit that weakness and destroy you. Then teach me," Viktor pleaded. "Help me become worthy of this task." The abbot rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the mountains beyond. "Very well," he said quietly. "You may stay here. You will work in the fields and study in the library. You will learn the prayers and rituals. You will train your body and purify your soul. But I warn you, the path you have chosen leads only to suffering and likely death. Even if you succeed in facing Count Dracula, Even if you manage to survive, the woman you love is already changed. She has tasted immortality. She has become a predator. Restoring her humanity may not restore your love. I have to try, Viktor said simply. I cannot live knowing I condemned her to that existence without attempting to save her. The abbot nodded slowly. Then your training begins tomorrow at dawn. The months that followed were the hardest of Viktor's life. He rose before sunrise each day to work in the monastery fields, hauling water, tilling soil, cutting wood. The labor was back-breaking, designed to strengthen his body and humble his spirit. After the work came hours in the library, studying ancient texts written in Latin and Greek, learning the histories of vampires and the methods used to combat them. He learned that vampires could be destroyed by sunlight, by a stake through the heart, by decapitation, by holy water. But Count Dracula was no ordinary vampire. He was the source, the progenitor protected by dark magic accumulated over centuries. In the evenings came prayer and meditation. Viktor, who had never been particularly devout, now spent hours on his knees in the cold chapel, reciting litanies until his voice was hoarse. The abbot instructed him in the discipline of faith, teaching him to empty his mind of doubt and fear, to fill himself instead with absolute conviction in the power of the divine. It was grueling work, far more difficult than any physical labor. Some nights, Viktor would lie awake in his narrow cell, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was wasting his time. What made him think he could succeed where trained vampire hunters had failed? He was just a peasant, a simple man who had loved a woman beyond his capacity to protect her. But then he would remember Elena's face on their wedding night, would remember the empty recognition in her crimson eyes, and his resolve would harden once more. Winter came, burying the monastery in snow. Viktor continued his training, now adding combat skills to his repertoire. An old monk named Brother Matthias, who had once been a soldier before taking holy vows, taught Viktor how to fight. Not the crude brawling of tavern disputes, but disciplined techniques for facing inhuman opponents. How to move quickly and efficiently, how to strike at vital points, how to resist the hypnotic gaze of a vampire, how to overcome the paralysis of supernatural fear. You will be terrified, Brother Matthias said as they sparred in the monastery courtyard, their breath misting in the cold air. Vampires project an aura of dread that can freeze the blood of ordinary men. You must learn to function despite that fear, to channel it into action rather than paralysis. Viktor trained until his muscles screamed, until blood dripped from split knuckles, until he could barely stand. And then he trained more. He would not fail Elena again through weakness or hesitation. As winter gave way to spring, Viktor's transformation became apparent. His body had grown lean and strong, his movements quick and precise. His mind had become a weapon, sharp and focused, capable of maintaining concentration even under extreme stress. And his faith, once a casual thing accepted without thought, had deepened into something profound and unshakable. He believed truly and completely that God had not abandoned Elena, that redemption was possible even for those who had fallen into darkness. The abbot observed Viktor's progress with satisfaction, tempered by concern. "You have come far," he told Viktor one evening as they walked through the monastery gardens. "But knowledge and skill are not enough. You must also understand what you are truly fighting. Count Dracula is not merely a monster. He is a fallen soul, once a man who chose darkness over light. He understands love and loss, honor and betrayal. He will use your emotions against you. He will make you doubt yourself. Doubt Elena. Doubt the very possibility of salvation." "I will not doubt," Viktor said firmly. "We shall see," the abbot replied. That night, the abbot led Viktor to a hidden chamber deep beneath the monastery, a place where the walls were covered in protective symbols and the air hummed with ancient power. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it lay a sword. It was not ornate or jeweled, but plain and functional, with a cross carved into its pommel and words in Latin inscribed along the blade. "This weapon was forged by a holy warrior centuries ago," the abbot explained. "It has been blessed by countless prayers and consecrated with the blood of martyrs. Against normal vampires it is devastating. Against Count Dracula it may give you a chance." But the sword alone will not save you. Your faith must guide the blade, or it is merely steel. Viktor lifted the sword, feeling its weight, its balance. It felt right in his hand, as if it had been waiting for him. "Thank you," he said to the abbot, "for everything you have given me." The abbot placed a hand on Viktor's shoulder. "Go with God, my son. And remember, even if you cannot save Elena, you can give her peace. Sometimes mercy takes the form of release." Viktor knew what the abbot meant. If Elena could not be restored, if the vampire she had become was too deeply rooted, then the kindest act would be to destroy her, to free her soul from its torment. The thought made him sick, but he forced himself to accept it. He would do what was necessary, whatever that might be. He left the monastery at dawn, carrying the sword wrapped in cloth, along with vials of holy water, wooden stakes, and a silver crucifix. The monks gathered to see him off, their prayers following him as he descended the mountain path. Viktor felt their faith bolstering his own, a warm presence that pushed back against the cold dread of what lay ahead. The journey back to Transylvania took weeks. Viktor traveled on foot, sleeping rough, avoiding villages where possible. He did not want to draw attention, did not want word reaching Castle Dracula that Elena's former betrothed was returning. Surprise might be his only advantage. As he drew closer to the Carpathian Mountains, Viktor began to hear stories. Travelers spoke of villages plagued by night terrors, of livestock drained of blood, of young women who disappeared and returned changed, their eyes empty, and their appetites unnatural. The vampire lord's influence was spreading, and with it, the corruption of the land itself. Fields grew barren. Wells ran dry. A pall of despair settled over the region like a shroud. Viktor also heard rumors of Elena. Some said she had become the Count's most devoted servant, his dark queen, more vicious than any vampire in his court. Others claimed she wept in her crypt during the day, mourning the humanity she had lost. Viktor did not know which stories to believe, but he held on to the hope that some part of Elena still existed, some fragment of the woman she had been. One night, as Viktor camped in a forest clearing, he was visited by an unexpected guest. An old woman emerged from the trees, bent with age, her eyes milky with cataracts. She shuffled toward Viktor's fire and sat down without invitation, warming her gnarled hands. "You are the one seeking to challenge Count Dracula," she said. It was not a question. Viktor's hand moved to his sword, but something in the woman's demeanor made him pause. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am one who remembers," she replied. "I was young when the Count first came to these mountains, when he built his castle on the bones of the old fortress. I have seen him take bride after bride, seen him corrupt the innocent and damn the faithful. You are not the first to seek his destruction, boy. You will not be the last." "Then you think I will fail," Viktor said bitterly. The old woman shook her head. "I think you have something the others lacked. You do not seek glory or vengeance. You seek only to save one soul. That purity of purpose may protect you where greater strength could not. But you must be warned. The Count's castle is more than stone and mortar. It is a living extension of his will, a trap designed to ensnare intruders. You cannot simply walk in and challenge him." "Then how do I reach him?" Viktor asked. The woman reached into her tattered cloak and withdrew a small object, pressing it into Viktor's hand. It was a key, black iron worked into the shape of a coiled serpent. "There is a tunnel," she said, "beneath the eastern wall of the castle. This key will open the gate that guards it. The tunnel leads to the crypts where the vampires sleep during the day. You must strike then while they are vulnerable." "Why are you helping me?" Viktor asked suspiciously. The old woman's expression was unreadable. "Because someone must. Because the Count's evil has gone unchecked for too long. And because the woman you seek to save once showed me kindness long ago, before she fell into darkness. She does not deserve the fate Dracula has imposed upon her." Before Viktor could ask anything more, the woman rose and shuffled back into the forest, disappearing among the trees as if she had never been. Viktor looked at the key in his hand, feeling its cold weight, wondering if he could trust this gift. But what choice did he have? He had no other plan, no other way to infiltrate the castle. The next day, Viktor reached the edge of the forest that surrounded Castle Dracula. He waited until dusk, then circled around to the eastern wall as the old woman had instructed. There, half hidden by overgrown vines and fallen stones, he found an iron gate set into the wall. The lock was shaped to match the serpent key. Viktor inserted it and turned. The mechanism groaned, reluctant after years of disuse, but finally the gate swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel descending into darkness. Viktor lit a torch and entered, pulling the gate closed behind him. The tunnel was cold and damp, the walls slick with moisture. His footsteps echoed in the confined space, and he moved as quietly as possible, alert for any sign of guards or traps. The tunnel wound downward for what seemed like hours, though Viktor knew it was likely only minutes. Time felt distorted in this place, stretched and compressed by the malevolent presence above. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Viktor extinguished his torch and waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. Slowly, shapes resolved themselves. Stone coffins lined the walls, dozens of them, each sealed with heavy lids. The crypts. This was where Dracula's court slept away the daylight hours. Viktor moved among the coffins, reading the names carved into the stone. Ancient names, some in languages he did not recognize. And then he found it. A coffin of black marble, larger than the others, positioned in the center of the chamber on a raised platform. No name was carved on this one, but Viktor knew without doubt that it contained Count Dracula himself. His hand went to the sword at his side, and he began to draw it. This was the moment. While the vampire lord slept, vulnerable and unaware, Viktor could end him with a single stroke. Elena would be free. The curse would be broken. But as his fingers closed around the hilt, Viktor heard a sound that froze his blood. Laughter, soft and mocking, echoing through the crypt. "Did you truly think it would be so easy?" a familiar voice said. "Did you imagine I would not sense your approach, not smell your living blood in my domain?" The lid of the black marble coffin slid open with a grinding of stone on stone. Count Dracula rose from within, his movements fluid and unhurried. He was dressed in the same black finery he had worn at the wedding, and his crimson eyes burned with amusement in the darkness. Viktor drew his sword fully, the blessed blade gleaming with a faint, holy light. Dracula regarded it with interest, but no apparent fear. "An impressive weapon," the vampire lord said, stepping down from his coffin. "I have seen its like before, carried by fools who thought themselves righteous. They all died screaming. But I commend your persistence, Viktor. Months of training, weeks of travel, all to reach this moment. Your determination is admirable, if ultimately futile." "I will not let you keep her," Viktor said, his voice steady despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm him. "Elena deserves to be free." Dracula circled Viktor slowly, his movements predatory. "Elena is free," he replied, "free from the limitations of mortality, free from the tedium of a peasant existence, free from you. She has embraced what she truly is. You cannot save someone who does not wish to be saved." "She was not given a choice," Viktor countered. "You seduced her, poisoned her with your blood, twisted her into something unnatural." The vampire lord's smile widened. "I merely revealed what was already there." "Do you know what Elena told me the first night she came to my manor? She said she felt trapped, suffocated by the expectations of her family and village. She said she dreamed of escape, of adventure, of passion. You could never have given her those things, Viktor. You are too ordinary, too safe." "I offered her eternity. You offered her damnation," Viktor shouted, and lunged forward with the sword. Dracula moved with inhuman speed, sidestepping the strike and catching Viktor's wrist in an iron grip. He squeezed, and Viktor felt the bones grind together, the sword slipping from his numb fingers. Dracula lifted Viktor off the ground with one hand, holding him at eye level. "Such spirit," the vampire whispered, "such foolish bravery. I could kill you now, drain you here in the darkness where no one would ever find your body. But that would be wasteful. Elena should have the honor of your blood. It seems only fitting." He threw Viktor across the chamber. Viktor crashed into a stone coffin, pain exploding through his ribs. He struggled to rise, gasping for breath, but before he could fully recover, Dracula was there, hauling him up by his throat. "Come," the vampire said. "Let us see if Elena remembers you." Dracula dragged Viktor from the crypt, Up winding stairs and through torchlit corridors, Viktor fought weakly, but it was like struggling against a mountain. They emerged into a grand bedchamber draped in crimson velvet and lit by 100 candles. And there, reclining on a massive bed, was Elena. She wore a gown of black lace that revealed more than it concealed, her pale skin luminous in the candlelight. When she saw Viktor, her expression shifted from boredom to surprise, to something that might have been recognition. "My love," Dracula said to her, releasing Viktor, who collapsed to the floor, "I have brought you a gift. Your former betrothed has come all this way to rescue you. I thought you might enjoy the irony." Elena rose from the bed and approached Viktor slowly. She knelt beside him, tilting her head as she studied his face. "Viktor," she said softly, and for a moment he heard an echo of the woman she had been. "Why did you come here?" "To save you," Viktor gasped. "To bring you back." Her expression hardened. "You cannot save me from what I have chosen. I am Dracula's bride, his queen. I have power you cannot imagine, pleasures you could never provide. Why would I ever return to the pitiful existence you offer?" "Because you are not a monster," Viktor said, reaching up to touch her cheek. "I know you, Elena. I know the goodness in your heart. This darkness is not you." For just an instant, Viktor saw something flicker in her eyes, some ghost of the girl who had once promised to marry him. Her hand covered his, and her skin was cold as death, but her touch was gentle. Then Dracula spoke, his voice cutting through the moment like a blade. "Elena, prove your loyalty to me. Drink his blood. Show me that your transformation is complete." Elena's eyes went distant, and Viktor realized she was fighting some internal battle. He saw her fangs extend, saw hunger bloom across her features, but he also saw tears gathering in her crimson eyes. "I cannot," she whispered. Dracula's expression turned to rage. He crossed the chamber in a blur and struck Elena, sending her sprawling. "She is still weak," he snarled, "still clinging to her pathetic mortal sentiments. I had thought her ready, but she requires more time, more education in the ways of darkness." He turned to Viktor. "You have planted doubt in her heart, mortal. For that you will suffer. I will keep you here, imprisoned in my dungeons. Each night I will let my court feed from you, draining you slowly, keeping you on the edge of death, and Elena will watch. She will witness your suffering until she understands that mercy is weakness, that compassion is a lie. Only then will she be truly mine." Viktor tried to rise, tried to fight, but his injuries left him helpless. Dracula summoned guards, vampires who emerged from the shadows and seized Viktor with cold hands. They dragged him from the chamber as Elena watched, her face a mask of anguish. The last thing Viktor saw before they pulled him into the corridor was Elena reaching out toward him, her lips forming his name. Then the door slammed shut, and he was hauled down into the bowels of the castle, into a darkness that seemed to swallow all hope. The dungeon was a place where light came to die. Viktor was thrown into a cell carved from living rock, the walls weeping with moisture, the air thick with the stench of decay and despair. Iron chains were fastened around his wrists and ankles, bolted to the stone floor with just enough slack for him to move a few feet in any direction. A single torch burned in the corridor beyond the bars, casting shadows that danced like demons on the walls. Viktor lost track of time in that place. There were no windows, no way to tell day from night. He existed in a perpetual twilight, broken only by the visits of Dracula's court. They came in groups of 2 or 3, pale aristocrats dressed in finery that had gone out of fashion centuries ago, their eyes burning with hunger and malice. They would enter his cell and feed upon him with practiced cruelty, opening veins in his arms and neck, drinking just enough to leave him weak and dizzy but alive. The pain was exquisite. Each bite felt like liquid fire pouring through his veins, and the sensation of his blood being drawn from his body filled him with a primal terror that never diminished, no matter how many times it happened. The vampires savored his fear as much as his blood, whispering taunts in his ear as they fed, telling him how Elena was forgetting him, how she was learning to embrace her new nature, how she would soon join them in feeding upon him. But worse than the physical torment was the knowledge that somewhere above, Elena was being corrupted further, twisted by Dracula into something utterly inhuman. Viktor clung to the memory of that moment in the bedchamber, when she had refused to drink from him, when tears had filled her eyes. That hesitation meant something. It meant she was still fighting, still holding on to some fragment of her humanity. He had to believe that, or he would go mad. Between the feedings, Viktor prayed. He recited the prayers the monks had taught him, drawing strength from the words even when his voice was barely a whisper. He remembered the abbot's teachings about faith as a weapon, about belief as armor against darkness. His body might be broken, but his spirit remained intact, a small flame of defiance that the vampires could not extinguish. On what Viktor guessed was the third night of his imprisonment, a different visitor came. He heard footsteps in the corridor, lighter than those of the guards, and then Elena appeared beyond the bars. She wore a simple gown of deep purple, her hair bound back, her face pale and drawn. For a long moment, she simply stood there, looking at him with an expression he could not read. "Viktor," she said finally, her voice soft, "I am sorry. I should not have let this happen to you." Viktor struggled to sit up, his chains rattling. "Elena," he said, and even speaking her name brought him comfort. "You can end this. You have the power to free me." She shook her head. "I cannot defy him. Dracula's will is absolute within these walls. If I were to release you, he would know instantly, and his punishment would be terrible. Then leave with me," Viktor urged. "We can escape together. I have learned much in the months since your wedding. There are ways to break a vampire's hold, rituals that can restore your humanity." Elena's laugh was bitter. "My humanity. Is that what you think I want?" "Viktor, I have tried to make you understand. I chose this existence. I welcomed it." "I do not believe you," Viktor said firmly. "I saw your tears. I saw you refuse to drink my blood." That was not the act of someone who has fully embraced damnation. Elena's composure cracked slightly. "You do not know what it is like," she whispered. "The hunger is constant, overwhelming. Every heartbeat I hear is a call to feed. Every human I encounter is prey. I must fight every moment not to give in completely to the monster I am becoming. And Dracula knows. He feels my weakness. That is why he brought you here, to force me to make a choice." "Then choose," Viktor said. "Choose humanity, choose light, choose me." She moved closer to the bars, and Viktor could see the agony in her eyes. "If I choose you, we will both die. Dracula will not let us leave. He has claimed me as his, and what he claims, he keeps." "There are worse things than death," Viktor replied. "Living as his slave, losing yourself piece by piece until nothing remains of the woman you were, that is true death. At least if we die together, we die free." Elena reached through the bars, her cold fingers finding his. "You were always an idealist," she said with something like fondness, "always seeing the world as you wished it to be rather than as it is. I loved that about you once." "And now?" Viktor asked. "Now I do not know what I feel," Elena admitted. "The woman who loved you still exists somewhere inside me, but she is drowning in darkness. Every night I feel her slipping further away. Soon there will be nothing left but the vampire, and the vampire feels nothing but hunger and desire for power." Viktor squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. "Then we must act quickly, before that happens." "Elena, please, I did not come all this way, suffer all this to watch you disappear into darkness. Help me escape. Together we can find a way to break Dracula's hold." Elena closed her eyes, and Viktor saw tears slip down her cheeks, tears tinged with red, blood tears that marked her as one of the damned. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "I want to believe redemption is possible, but I am so afraid." "Fear is not weakness," Viktor said gently. "It means you are still human enough to care about the consequences of your choices. Trust that part of yourself. Trust me." For a long moment, Elena stood frozen, caught between two natures, two futures. Then slowly she nodded. "Tonight," she said, "Dracula will be occupied with his court. There is a gathering, a ritual he performs each month. He will be distracted. I will come for you then." She released his hand and stepped back from the bars. "Do not let them break you, Viktor. Hold on to your strength a little longer." Then she was gone, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. Viktor slumped back against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. He had convinced her, or at least planted doubt deep enough to make her act. Now he could only wait and pray that her resolve would hold. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. 2 more vampires came to feed, and Viktor endured their assault with gritted teeth, preserving what strength he could. They mocked him as they drank, telling him that Elena was at that very moment participating in Dracula's ritual, that she was proving her loyalty by draining a peasant girl brought from a nearby village. Viktor refused to believe them. He had seen the conflict in Elena's eyes. She was still fighting. Finally, when Viktor felt he could endure no more, he heard footsteps approaching. Elena appeared alone this time, carrying a ring of keys that jangled softly. Her gown was stained with blood, and Viktor's heart sank. "The ritual," he said hoarsely. "Did you participate?" Elena unlocked the cell door, her hands trembling. "I had no choice. Dracula was watching, but I took only a little, enough to satisfy him. The girl lives. She will recover." She knelt beside Viktor and began unlocking his chains. The metal fell away, and Viktor tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Elena caught him, her supernatural strength supporting his weight. "We must hurry," she said. "The ritual will conclude soon, and Dracula will sense my absence." She helped Viktor from the cell and through the dungeon corridors. They moved as quickly as Viktor's weakened state allowed, Elena supporting him when he stumbled. They climbed narrow stairs and passed through abandoned sections of the castle, avoiding areas where guards might patrol. "Where are we going?" Viktor gasped. "There is a passage," Elena replied. "It leads beyond the castle walls, into the forest. It was used centuries ago by servants fleeing from some ancient conflict. Dracula believes it's sealed, but I have kept it open, maintained it in secret. I think some part of me always knew I might need an escape." They reached a section of wall covered in tapestries. Elena pulled one aside to reveal a narrow opening, barely wide enough for a person to pass through. She lit a candle from a wall sconce and handed it to Viktor. "Go," she urged. "Follow the passage to its end. You will emerge in a cave near the base of the mountain. From there you can reach safety." Viktor stared at her. "You are not coming." Elena's expression was anguished. "I cannot. If I flee with you, Dracula will hunt us both. His reach is vast, his resources infinite. We would never be free of him. But if I remain, if I tell him you escaped on your own, he may believe me. He may allow me to stay." Viktor grasped her shoulders. "I will not leave you here. That was not the plan. There is no plan that ends with both of us surviving," Elena said, and her voice broke. "Please, Viktor, let me do this. Let me save you, even if I cannot save myself. It is the only way I can atone for what I have become." "No," Viktor said fiercely. "We leave together, or not at all." Elena leaned forward and kissed him, her lips cold but her emotion blazing through the contact. It was a kiss of farewell, of love that transcended death, of regret for all that might have been. When she pulled back, Viktor saw that she had made her decision. "Forgive me," she whispered, and then she shoved him through the opening. Viktor fell into the passage, the candle tumbling from his hand and extinguishing. He heard stone grinding on stone as Elena sealed the entrance behind him. He scrambled back in the darkness, his hands finding only solid wall where the opening had been. "Elena," he shouted, pounding on the stone. "Elena, open it, please." Her voice came muffled through the wall. "Go, Viktor, live. And if you truly love me, find a way to destroy Dracula. That is the only way to free me. I will wait for you for as long as I can hold on to myself. But you must promise me if I become lost completely, if the monster consumes the woman, you will not hesitate to end me. I promise," Viktor said, tears streaming down his face. "I swear it." Then there was only silence. Viktor stood in the darkness for a long time, his grief threatening to overwhelm him. But slowly, gradually, determination reasserted itself. Elena had given him a gift, had risked everything to let him escape. He would not waste that sacrifice. He would find a way to destroy Dracula. He would save Elena or grant her the mercy of death. Viktor felt his way along the passage, moving by touch through the absolute blackness. The tunnel was rough-hewn, the walls damp and irregular. Several times he stumbled over rubble or struck his head on low-hanging sections of ceiling, but he pressed forward, driven by Elena's last words, by the promise he had made. After what felt like hours, Viktor saw a faint gleam of light ahead. The passage began to slope upward, and soon he emerged into a cave mouth overlooking a valley. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Viktor breathed the fresh air, feeling its sweetness like a benediction after the stale corruption of the castle. He was free. But the weight of his promise pressed upon him heavier than any chain. Somewhere behind him, Elena was facing Dracula's wrath, enduring punishment for her mercy. Viktor could only imagine what torments the vampire lord would devise for her defiance. He began the descent down the mountain, his body crying out in protest with every step. He was weak from blood loss, bruised and battered, but he forced himself onward. When he reached the tree line, he allowed himself to collapse, his strength finally giving out. He lay there as the sun rose higher, warming his skin, reminding him that he still lived. A sound made him open his eyes. An old woman stood over him, the same one who had given him the serpent key. She held a water skin and a bundle of cloth. "Drink," she commanded, and Viktor obeyed, the water like paradise on his parched throat. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal bread and cheese, and Viktor ate ravenously. "You failed," the old woman observed. "Not yet," Viktor replied. "I live, and as long as I live, there is hope." The woman nodded slowly. "The girl who helped you escape will suffer for it. Dracula does not forgive betrayal." Viktor's hands clenched. "I know. That is why I must return. I must find a way to kill him." The old woman was quiet for a moment. "There is a man," she said finally. "A scholar who has dedicated his life to studying Dracula, learning his weaknesses. He lives in a monastery far to the east beyond the mountains. If anyone knows how to destroy the vampire lord, it is him." Viktor sat up, ignoring the pain. "Where?" he demanded. "How do I find him?" The woman gave him directions describing landmarks and roads. "But be warned," she said. "The journey is long and dangerous, and even if you reach this scholar, even if he shares his knowledge, Dracula has survived for centuries. Many have tried to kill him, all have died." "I will be different," Viktor said with grim certainty. "I have something they did not have. I have love as my weapon, and nothing is stronger than that." The old woman smiled sadly. "We shall see, boy. We shall see." She helped Viktor to his feet and pointed him toward the road. He walked away from Castle Dracula as the sun climbed higher, casting his shadow long before him. Behind him, hidden in darkness, Elena endured her punishment. Viktor felt her suffering as if it were his own, a constant ache in his chest. But he also felt her hope. She believed in him. She had sacrificed her freedom so he might live to fight another day. He would not let that sacrifice be in vain. The journey to the eastern monastery took weeks. Viktor traveled as a beggar, accepting charity when offered, stealing when necessary, always moving forward. His body healed slowly, the wounds from the vampire feedings leaving scars but no lasting damage. The monks at the first monastery had trained him well, and that training sustained him now. He asked about the scholar in every village and town, following rumors and whispers. Some said the man was a saint, others called him mad, obsessed with his crusade against darkness. Viktor did not care which was true. He needed knowledge, and this scholar possessed it. Finally, on a cold autumn evening that mirrored the night when he had first taken Elena to meet Dr. Corvinus, Viktor reached his destination. The monastery was built into the side of a cliff, its walls the same grey stone as the mountain itself. He climbed the steep path and knocked on the wooden gate. A monk answered, eyeing Viktor's ragged appearance with suspicion. "What do you want, pilgrim?" "I seek Brother Ambrose," Viktor said. "I was told he knows how to kill Count Dracula." The monk's expression shifted from suspicion to recognition. "You are the one," he said quietly, "the one the prophecy spoke of. Come. Brother Ambrose has been expecting you." Viktor was led through the monastery to a tower chamber, lined with books and manuscripts. An old man sat at a desk covered in papers, his hair white as snow, his face deeply lined, but his eyes sharp and clear. He looked up as Viktor entered and smiled. "Viktor," Brother Ambrose said. "Yes, I see it in you, the determination, the love, the faith. You are the one who will end this curse." Viktor approached the desk. "You know who I am. "I have been watching Count Dracula for 50 years," Brother Ambrose replied. "I have documented every bride he has taken, every victim he has claimed. When Elena Vasile became his target, I knew her story would be different. I knew someone would rise to challenge him, and when I heard of a young man training at the Western Monastery, learning to fight vampires, I knew you were that someone. Then help me," Viktor pleaded. "Tell me how to destroy him." Brother Ambrose rose and went to a chest in the corner of the room. He opened it and withdrew a manuscript bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. "This," he said, "contains everything I have learned. Dracula's history, his powers, his limitations. But most importantly, it contains the one method that might truly destroy him." He laid the manuscript on the desk and opened it to a page covered in dense Latin text and arcane symbols. "Dracula is sustained by a dark ritual he performed centuries ago," Brother Ambrose explained. "He bound his soul to his castle, making it a vessel for his immortality. As long as the castle stands, he cannot truly die. You could stake him, burn him, decapitate him, and he would simply reform within his crypt. The castle itself is his phylactery." "Then I must destroy the castle," Viktor said. Brother Ambrose nodded. "But that is no simple task. The castle is protected by powerful enchantments. Only one who has been invited inside, one who has accepted hospitality from the master, can break those enchantments. And the ritual to do so requires a sacrifice." Viktor's blood ran cold. "What kind of sacrifice?" "The willing sacrifice of one who loves Dracula truly," Brother Ambrose said. "One of his brides must give up her immortality, must die by holy fire while speaking the words of unbinding. Only then will the enchantments fall and the castle become vulnerable." Viktor sank into a chair, the implications crushing him. "Elena," he whispered. "She would have to die." Brother Ambrose placed a hand on Viktor's shoulder. "I am sorry, my son. Love is often the price of redemption. But know this, if Elena makes that sacrifice, her soul will be purified. She will die human, not vampire. She will find peace in the next world." Viktor buried his face in his hands. After everything, after all his training and suffering and determination, the only way to save Elena's soul was to watch her die. The cruelty of it was almost unbearable. But as he sat there in that tower chamber, surrounded by knowledge accumulated over decades, Viktor understood what must be done. Elena had told him herself, had made him promise that if she became lost, he would end her. Perhaps this was not ending, but transformation, not death, but liberation. He raised his head and looked at Brother Ambrose with eyes reddened by tears, but clear with purpose. "Teach me the ritual," he said. "Teach me everything. I will do whatever is necessary." Brother Ambrose smiled gently. "I knew you would. Come, we have much work ahead of us, and time is not our ally. With each passing night, Elena falls deeper into darkness. We must act before the woman you love is lost completely." And so Viktor's true education began. He studied the manuscript, memorizing the words of unbinding, learning the prayers and preparations required for the ritual. He trained with holy relics and consecrated weapons. He fasted and prayed, purifying himself for the battle ahead. But through it all, in every quiet moment, Viktor thought of Elena. He remembered her smile before the illness came. He remembered her courage in helping him escape. He remembered her tears, red with blood, but still tears of genuine sorrow. She was worth saving, even if saving her meant letting her go. 3 months after arriving at the monastery, Viktor was ready. Brother Ambrose blessed him and gave him the tools he would need: a sword forged in holy fire, vials of water from sacred springs, and most precious of all, the manuscript containing the ritual of unbinding. "God go with you," Brother Ambrose said, as Viktor prepared to depart, "and may you find the strength to do what must be done." Viktor embraced the old scholar. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me hope when I had none." Then he left the monastery and began the long journey back to Transylvania, back to Castle Dracula, back to Elena. The winter snows had begun to fall, blanketing the world in white. Viktor walked through that cold beauty, with a heart heavy with sorrow but resolute with purpose. He was coming for Elena, and this time he would not fail. Winter held the Carpathian Mountains in its iron grip as Viktor made his way back through the frozen landscape. The world had become a place of stark contrasts, white snow against black trees, brilliant sunlight against the deep shadows of the valleys. He traveled slowly, conserving his strength, stopping at villages along the way to gather supplies and information. The news he heard was grim. Dracula's influence had spread like a plague. Entire villages had been abandoned, their inhabitants either dead or transformed into lesser vampires who served the Count's will. The peasants spoke in hushed whispers of a dark queen who ruled beside Dracula, more beautiful and terrible than any creature they had ever seen. Some claimed she wept blood as she fed. Others said she had lost all trace of humanity and reveled in slaughter. Viktor's heart ached with each tale. He did not know which stories were true and which were exaggerations born of fear, but he clung to the memory of Elena refusing to drink his blood, of her helping him escape despite the cost. That woman still existed somewhere within the vampire she had become. He had to believe that. As he drew closer to Castle Dracula, Viktor began to see signs of the vampire lord's power made manifest. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches reaching toward the sky like clawed hands. Animals behaved strangely, wolves watching him from the forest with eyes that gleamed with almost human intelligence. The very air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the land itself had been corrupted by centuries of darkness. Viktor reached the forest surrounding the castle on a moonless night. He had timed his arrival deliberately, knowing that the darkest nights were when Dracula's power was greatest, but also when his attention would be divided among his many servants and schemes. Viktor moved through the trees like a ghost, using the skills brother Matthias had taught him, making no sound, leaving no trail. He did not approach through the tunnel Elena had shown him. That route would surely be watched now, sealed or trapped after his escape. Instead, Viktor circled to the northern wall where the old woman had told him of a weakness in the castle's defenses. A section of wall had crumbled partially in some ancient siege and been repaired with mortar that had never been properly blessed. The enchantments there were thin, breakable by one who knew the proper prayers. Viktor found the spot and began the ritual Brother Ambrose had taught him. He traced symbols in the snow, lit candles blessed by holy men, and recited prayers in Latin that rang with power in the cold air. The wall before him began to shimmer, the stones becoming translucent, and then with a sound like breaking glass, a passage opened. Viktor stepped through into a narrow corridor that smelled of dust and age. He was inside Castle Dracula once more, but this time he came not as a prisoner, but as an instrument of divine judgment. The sword at his side felt warm despite the cold, as if the holy fire used in its forging still burned within the blade. He moved through the castle with purpose, following the mental map he had created during his imprisonment. He knew where the great hall lay, where Dracula held court. He knew where the crypts were hidden, and he knew where Elena's chambers were located. In the eastern tower overlooking the valley, Viktor chose to seek Elena first. He needed to speak with her before confronting Dracula, needed to prepare her for what must come. The ritual of unbinding required her willing participation. If she refused, if the vampire within her had grown too strong, then all his planning would be for nothing. He climbed the spiral stairs of the eastern tower, his footsteps silent on the stone. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows. At the top of the stairs stood a door of dark wood bound with iron. Viktor tested it and found it unlocked. He pushed it open and entered. The chamber beyond was lavish in the way of old nobility, filled with velvet drapes and antique furniture. Candles burned everywhere, hundreds of them, filling the room with soft golden light. And there, standing before a window that looked out over the snow-covered mountains, was Elena. She wore a gown of deepest black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her hair fell loose to her waist, and even from behind Viktor could see the unearthly grace in her posture. She did not turn as he entered, though he knew she must have heard him. "I wondered if you would return," she said softly, "or if you would be wise enough to flee far from this place and never look back." "You know I could never do that," Viktor replied, closing the door behind him. Elena turned slowly and Viktor's breath caught. She was more beautiful than he remembered, but it was a cold beauty, perfect and terrible. Her skin glowed pale in the candlelight, flawless as porcelain. Her eyes burned with crimson fire, and when she smiled, her fangs gleamed sharp as knives. "You have changed," she observed. "You are stronger, more dangerous. The frightened boy who accompanied me to meet Dracula is gone. I had to become what was necessary," Viktor said, "just as you did." Elena's smile faded. "Do not compare us, Viktor. I chose this path. You were forced onto yours." "Did you truly choose?" Viktor asked gently. "Or were you seduced by promises of power and eternity, blinded to what you would lose in the exchange?" Elena moved toward him with inhuman grace, her footsteps making no sound. "What have I lost?" she asked. "Mortality, the slow decay of age, the weakness of human flesh. I am stronger than I ever was, faster, more alive in ways you cannot comprehend. I can hear your heartbeat from across the room. I can smell the blood in your veins. The world is sharper now, more vivid. Why would I ever want to return to what I was?" "Because what you were had a soul," Viktor said. "What you are now is beautiful but hollow. You are a vessel filled with darkness, Elena. And I have seen in your eyes that you know this truth even if you refuse to speak it." Her expression flickered, and for just a moment, Viktor saw pain beneath the vampire's mask. "I suffer," she whispered. "Every moment of every night, I suffer. The hunger is constant, overwhelming. And worse than the hunger is the memory of who I was, always there, always accusing me. Sometimes I wish Dracula had simply killed me outright rather than trapping me in this half-existence." "Then let me free you," Viktor said, taking a step closer. "I have learned a way to break the curse, to destroy Dracula and end this nightmare. But I need your help." Elena laughed bitterly. "You think you can destroy him? Viktor, he is ancient beyond measure. He has survived holy warriors and vampire hunters, armies and inquisitions. What makes you believe you will succeed where they failed?" "Because I have something they did not," Viktor replied. "I have you." He explained the ritual of unbinding, told her what Brother Ambrose had discovered about Dracula's immortality being tied to the castle itself. Elena listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Viktor finished, silence filled the chamber. "You are asking me to die," Elena said finally. "I am asking you to make a choice," Viktor corrected, "to choose redemption over damnation, to die human rather than live forever as a monster. Brother Ambrose said your soul would be purified, that you would find peace." Elena turned away, moving back to the window. "Peace," she repeated. "I have almost forgotten what that word means. But Viktor, even if I wanted to do this, even if I was willing to sacrifice myself, Dracula would never allow it. He watches me always. He knows my thoughts, my feelings. The moment I agreed to help you, he would know." "Then we deceive him," Viktor said. "You are his bride. You have access to him that I do not. You can lead him to believe you are still loyal while preparing for the ritual." Elena shook her head. "You do not understand the bond between us. He is in my blood, in my very being. I cannot hide my true intentions from him." Viktor moved to stand beside her at the window. "Then do not hide them," he said. "Let him see your conflict. Let him believe you are torn between your vampire nature and your lingering human feelings. He will expect that. What he will not expect is your willingness to act despite that conflict." Elena looked at him, and Viktor saw tears forming in her eyes, red tears that tracked down her pale cheeks like trails of blood. "You ask so much of me," she whispered. "I ask only what you once would have given freely," Viktor replied. "Your courage, your strength, your love." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers cold but gentle. "I still love you," she said. "That is the cruelest part of this curse. The vampire cannot love, but the human trapped within still does. I dream of you during the day when I lie in my crypt. I remember our childhood, the promises we made, the life we might have had. Those memories are torture." "Then end the torture," Viktor urged. "Help me destroy Dracula. Help me free you and all the others he has enslaved." Elena closed her eyes, and Viktor saw her warring with herself. He waited, barely breathing, knowing this was the moment upon which everything depended. If she refused, he would have to find another way, and there might be no other way. When Elena opened her eyes again, they blazed with determination. "Tell me what I must do," she said. Relief flooded through Viktor. He explained the ritual in detail, the preparations required, the timing that would be essential. Elena listened carefully, asking questions, clarifying points. Despite her transformation, her mind remained sharp and quick. "The ritual must take place in the Great Hall," Viktor said. "That is where Dracula's connection to the castle is strongest, and it must be done during the dark of the moon, when his power is at its peak. If we succeed then, when he is strongest, the binding will be broken completely." "That is tomorrow night," Elena said. "The lunar cycle is almost complete." "I know," Viktor replied. "I planned it that way. Can you gather what we need?" Elena nodded. "The holy water and blessed salt will be difficult to obtain within the castle, but there are storage rooms where items seized from churches are kept. Dracula likes to desecrate such things, to prove his dominance over the divine. I can access those rooms without suspicion." "And the fire?" Viktor asked. "The ritual requires holy fire." "I have candles blessed by priests in my chambers," Elena said. "Gifts from villages seeking Dracula's mercy, not knowing he has no mercy to give. The flames from those candles will serve." Viktor took her hands in his. "Tomorrow night, then. When the moon is dark and Dracula is at his most powerful, we will strike. We will burn away the darkness." Elena squeezed his hands. "If we fail, if he destroys us, promise me something. Promise me you will not regret trying. Promise me you will not curse yourself for not fleeing when you had the chance." "I promise," Viktor said. "And I promise you something as well. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. I will tell your story, Elena. I will make sure the world remembers not the vampire you became, but the woman you were, and the courage you showed in choosing redemption." She leaned forward and kissed him, and though her lips were cold, Viktor felt warmth in the gesture, felt the human soul still trapped within the undead flesh. When they parted, Elena smiled sadly. "Go now," she said. "Find a place to hide until tomorrow night. I will make the preparations. And Viktor, if something goes wrong, if I cannot go through with this, if the vampire proves stronger than the woman, you must not hesitate. You must destroy me." "I will do what must be done," Viktor promised, though the words felt like knives in his throat. He left Elena's chamber and made his way through the castle to a forgotten storage room he had discovered during his earlier imprisonment. It was filled with broken furniture and moth-eaten tapestries, a place no servant visited and no vampire cared about. Viktor barricaded himself inside and settled down to wait. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Viktor could hear the castle waking around him as night fell, the movement of servants and vampires, the sound of dark revelry echoing through stone corridors. He prayed for strength, for courage, for the faith that would see him through what was to come. As the night deepened, Viktor prepared himself. He donned the simple black clothing he had brought, garments that would not hinder movement. He checked his weapons, the sword blessed in holy fire, the vials of sacred water, the wooden stakes carved from trees grown in consecrated ground. Everything was ready. When midnight approached, Viktor emerged from his hiding place and made his way toward the great hall. The castle seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Viktor wondered if Dracula sensed something, if his ancient instincts warned him of approaching danger. But the vampire lord's arrogance might prove his undoing. He had ruled unchallenged for so long that he likely could not imagine a true threat. Viktor reached the great hall and found the doors standing open. Inside, candles burned by the hundreds, arranged in complex patterns across the floor. In the center of those patterns stood Elena, and beside her, inevitable as death itself, stood Count Dracula. The vampire lord smiled when he saw Viktor. "Welcome," he said, his voice filling the hall like thunder. "I have been expecting you." Viktor's hand moved to his sword, but he did not draw it. Elena looked at him with an expression of anguish and apology. She had been discovered. Somehow Dracula had learned of their plan. "Did you truly think you could deceive me?" Dracula continued, descending from the dais where he stood. "I am the master of this domain. I know every thought, every scheme, every whisper of rebellion. Elena's betrayal was obvious from the moment you entered her chamber. I felt her hope kindle, felt her determination grow. "I allowed it because I wanted you here, wanted you to witness your failure completely." Viktor drew his sword, the blade bursting into holy flame. "Then you have made a mistake," he said. "You have given me exactly what I need. The ritual can still be performed." Dracula laughed. "You think I do not know the ritual. You think I have not protected against it. Viktor, I orchestrated the very legends that speak of my destruction. I created false weaknesses so that hunters would waste their lives pursuing phantoms. The ritual of unbinding cannot harm me because there is nothing to unbind. My power does not come from this castle. It comes from darkness itself, from the primal void that existed before creation. I am eternal." Viktor felt cold dread settling over him. If Dracula spoke the truth, if Brother Ambrose had been deceived, then all his planning was worthless. But he looked at Elena and saw something in her eyes, some flicker of hope that had not been extinguished. "He is lying," Elena said quietly. "Viktor, he is afraid. I can feel it. He fears what we might accomplish." Dracula's expression hardened. "Silence," he commanded, and Elena gasped as if struck. "You have proven yourself disloyal, my bride. For that you will watch as I destroy this mortal slowly, tearing him apart piece by piece. And then I will drain you to the edge of death and remake you, stripping away every last trace of humanity until only the vampire remains." He moved toward Viktor with inhuman speed, but Viktor was ready. He had trained for this moment, had learned to see beyond normal perception, to anticipate movements too fast for human eyes to follow. He swung the flaming sword in a precise arc, and Dracula was forced to leap back, the holy fire singing the air where he had been. "Impressive," Dracula said. "You have learned much, but skill alone will not save you." They began to circle each other, predator and prey, though which was which remained uncertain. Viktor could feel the weight of Dracula's presence, the suffocating aura of power that radiated from the ancient vampire. It took every ounce of his faith to resist the urge to flee, to keep his sword steady and his mind clear. "Elena," he called out without taking his eyes from Dracula. "The ritual. Begin it now." "She cannot," Dracula said. "I have bound her will to mine. She is paralyzed, unable to act against me." But even as he spoke, Elena moved. Her hands trembled with the effort, fighting against invisible chains, but she managed to lift one of the blessed candles. She began to recite the words of unbinding, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each syllable. Dracula snarled in rage and lunged for Elena, but Viktor threw himself between them. The sword clashed against Dracula's bare hands, which had transformed into claws of blackened iron. Sparks flew where holy fire met unholy flesh, and Dracula screamed in pain and fury. "Impossible," he roared. "No mortal should have the strength to resist me." "I am not just a mortal," Viktor replied, pressing his attack. "I am a man who loves, and love is stronger than any darkness you can summon." Elena's voice grew louder, the words of the ritual resonating through the hall. The candles around the room began to burn brighter, their flames merging into rivers of holy fire that flowed across the floor in intricate patterns. Dracula felt them approaching and tried to escape, but Viktor blocked his path, sword flashing in deadly arcs. The vampire lord's confidence crumbled into desperation. He transformed into a massive bat, wings spreading to fill half the hall, but the holy fire rose up in walls around him, trapping him. He became a wolf, snarling and snapping, but Viktor stood firm, sword pointed at the creature's heart. "Elena," Dracula howled, "you are mine. You cannot do this, I forbid it." But Elena continued the ritual, and Viktor saw flames beginning to engulf her as well. The holy fire that would destroy Dracula would also consume her, burning away the vampire and purifying the human soul beneath. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never faltered. Viktor wanted to stop it, wanted to save her from the flames, but he knew he could not. This was her choice, her sacrifice. He could only honor it by ensuring Dracula did not escape. The vampire lord made one final desperate attempt, gathering all his power for a strike that would shatter Viktor's defenses. He transformed back into his human form, more terrible than before, his features twisted with rage and hatred. He raised his clawed hands and brought them down with force that could have split stone. But Viktor did not flinch. He raised his sword to meet the blow, and when Dracula's claws struck the blessed blade, there was an explosion of light that filled the hall like a sun rising at midnight. Dracula staggered back, smoke rising from his hands. The holy fire reached him, wrapping around his legs, climbing his body. He screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the castle and beyond, across the mountains, a death cry that had been centuries in coming. Viktor turned to Elena and saw her standing in a pillar of flame, her form becoming translucent, fading. She looked at him across the inferno and smiled, a smile of peace and release. "Thank you," she mouthed, and then she was gone, consumed by holy fire, her soul rising free at last. Dracula collapsed as the flames engulfed him completely. His screams faded to silence, and his body crumbled to ash that scattered in a wind that seemed to blow from nowhere. The castle itself began to shake, stones grinding against stones, the enchantments that had held it together for centuries finally breaking. Viktor ran from the hall as the ceiling began to collapse. He raced through corridors that were falling apart around him, leaping over chasms that opened in the floor, ducking falling stones. Behind him he heard the death throes of Castle Dracula, the groaning of a structure that had stood for too long, sustained only by dark magic. He burst out into the courtyard as the towers began to topple. Vampires fled from every exit, their immortality suddenly vulnerable without their master's protection. Some burst into flame as they ran, others simply dissolved into ash. The court of darkness was scattering, their power broken. Viktor did not stop running until he reached the forest beyond the castle walls. There he turned and watched as Castle Dracula collapsed upon itself, stone by stone, tower by tower, until nothing remained but a pile of rubble shrouded in dust and smoke. And rising from that destruction, Viktor saw lights, hundreds of them, souls freed from bondage, spirits that had been trapped for decades or centuries now released to find peace. Among those lights, Viktor believed he saw one that burned brighter than the others, a soul purified by sacrifice, rising toward heaven. Elena, free at last. Viktor sank to his knees in the snow, overwhelmed by grief and exhaustion and relief. It was done. Dracula was destroyed. Elena was saved, though not in the way he had once hoped. She was gone from this world, but her soul lived on clean and pure. He did not know how long he knelt there watching the lights fade one by one into the night sky. Eventually he became aware of other presences, peasants emerging from the forest, people who had hidden when Dracula's power was strong but now crept forward to witness his fall. Among them, Viktor saw the old woman who had helped him twice before. She approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have done what none others could," she said quietly. "The curse is broken. The land will heal. And the woman you loved is at peace." Viktor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "What will you do now?" the old woman asked. Viktor looked at the ruins of Castle Dracula, then up at the stars emerging as the dust settled. "I will live," he said finally. "I will honor her sacrifice by living well, by helping others, by ensuring her story is remembered. That is what she would want." The old woman smiled. "Then you have truly won," she said, "for love that endures beyond death is love eternal." She faded back into the crowd of gathered villagers, and Viktor was left alone with his grief and his victory. He rose slowly, his body aching with exhaustion, and began to walk down the mountain toward the valley below. Behind him, Castle Dracula smoldered in ruins, its terror ended, its curse lifted. And somewhere in the heavens, Elena's soul shone like a star, watching over him, guiding him toward whatever future awaited. Viktor walked through the winter landscape as dawn broke over the Carpathian Mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. The world felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the very air. Birds sang in the trees for the first time in years, their voices sweet and clear. The oppressive darkness that had hung over the region like a funeral shroud was gone, burned away by holy fire and sacrifice. He made his way to the nearest village, a collection of humble cottages that had survived Dracula's reign through a combination of luck and isolation. The villagers emerged from their homes as news of the castle's destruction spread. their faces showing disbelief mixed with cautious hope. An old man approached Viktor, studying his haggard appearance with knowing eyes. "You were there," the old man said. "It was not a question. You saw the castle fall." Viktor nodded wearily. "Count Dracula is destroyed. The curse is broken. Your people are free." A woman fell to her knees, crossing herself and weeping. Others followed, some crying, some laughing, some simply standing in stunned silence as they processed the impossible news. For generations they had lived under Dracula's shadow, offering their children and their blood to appease an immortal monster. Now that monster was gone, turned to ash, and they could scarcely believe it. The village priest, a young man who had inherited his position after the previous priest had been taken by vampires, pushed through the crowd. He grasped Viktor's hands, his eyes shining with tears. "God has answered our prayers," he said. "You are his instrument, brother. You have delivered us from evil." Viktor shook his head. "I am no saint, father. I am only a man who loved a woman enough to fight for her soul. The true hero was Elena. She made the sacrifice that ended the curse. Remember her name. Honor her memory." The priest nodded solemnly. "We will build a shrine to her. We will tell her story to our children and our children's children. Elena the Redeemer, who chose light over darkness and saved us all." Viktor remained in the village for 3 days, resting and recovering his strength. The villagers fed him and tended his wounds, treating him with a reverence that made him uncomfortable. He was not seeking glory or worship. He had done what love required, nothing more. But he accepted their gratitude with grace, knowing they needed to express their relief somehow. On the 4th day, Viktor set out again, this time heading west toward the monastery where Brother Ambrose waited. The old scholar deserved to know that his lifetime of research had borne fruit, that his knowledge had helped destroy the darkness. The journey took 2 weeks, and Viktor used the time to reflect on all that had happened, to grieve properly for Elena, to begin the slow process of healing. When he finally reached the eastern monastery, Brother Ambrose met him at the gate. The old man's face lit up with joy when he saw Viktor alive and whole. "I felt it," Brother Ambrose said, embracing Viktor. "I felt the moment the curse broke. The darkness that has weighed upon my soul for 50 years simply lifted. I knew you had succeeded." They walked together to the tower chamber, where Viktor had first learned of the ritual. There, surrounded by books and manuscripts, Viktor told the complete story. He spoke of infiltrating the castle, of convincing Elena to help, of the confrontation with Dracula, and of Elena's willing sacrifice. Brother Ambrose listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When Viktor finished, the old scholar was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "She was brave beyond measure," he said, "to choose redemption knowing it meant death, to hold fast to her humanity despite the vampire's hunger, that required a strength of spirit few possess. You were right to love her, Viktor. She was worthy of that love." "What do I do now?" Viktor asked. "I feel adrift, as if my purpose ended with her death. I do not know who I am without this quest." Brother Ambrose smiled gently. "You are who you have always been, a man of faith and courage, a man capable of great love. The quest may be over, but your life continues. You must find new purpose, new ways to serve the light." Viktor spent several weeks at the monastery, helping the monks with their daily work, spending long hours in prayer and meditation. Slowly, gradually, the raw wound of Elena's loss began to scar over. It would never fully heal, he knew. He would carry her memory always, but the pain became bearable, transformed into something bittersweet rather than agonizing. Brother Ambrose suggested Viktor might join their order, take vows and dedicate himself to scholarship and prayer. But Viktor knew that path was not for him. He was a man of action, not contemplation. He needed to be out in the world, helping others, fighting whatever darkness he encountered. One morning Viktor woke with clarity about his future. He found Brother Ambrose in the library and told him of his decision. "I will become a hunter," Viktor said. "Not of vampires specifically, though I will face them if I must, but of all creatures that prey upon the innocent. There is much darkness in the world beyond Dracula's curse. I will spend my life pushing back against that darkness, Brother Ambrose nodded approvingly. "A noble calling, but you must be careful not to become consumed by it. Remember that you fight for life and light, not out of hatred or vengeance. The moment you begin to enjoy the hunt, to take pleasure in destruction, you risk becoming that which you fight." "I will remember," Viktor promised. "And I will remember Elena. She will be my guide, my reminder of why this work matters." Brother Ambrose gave Viktor supplies for his journey, including several books on various supernatural creatures and their weaknesses. He also gave him a letter of introduction to other monasteries and churches throughout Europe, places where Viktor could find shelter and support in his travels. They embraced at the gate, two men bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. "Go with God," Brother Ambrose said, "and may Elena's soul watch over you." Viktor traveled south first into regions where reports of supernatural activity had increased in recent years. In a village near the Danube, he encountered a werewolf that had been terrorizing shepherds. Viktor tracked the creature to its lair and faced it on the night of the full moon. The battle was fierce, but Viktor's training and faith saw him through. He killed the beast with a silver blade blessed by priests, and the village celebrated their deliverance. In a city to the west, Viktor helped cleanse a house possessed by an evil spirit. The demon had driven a family to the brink of madness, causing them to turn on each other with violence and hatred. Viktor performed an exorcism with the help of a local priest, driving the spirit out through prayer and holy water. The family recovered slowly, their home and their sanity restored. Word of Viktor's deeds began to spread. He became known as a hunter of darkness, a man who could be called upon when natural explanations failed and supernatural evil threatened. He never sought payment, accepting only food and shelter, sometimes not even that. His reward was in the work itself, in the lives saved and the evil defeated. Years passed. Viktor's hair began to gray at the temples, his body accumulated scars from countless battles, but his faith never wavered, and his skill only grew sharper with experience. He trained others when he could, passing on the knowledge he had gained. A small network of hunters began to form, men and women dedicated to protecting the innocent from creatures of darkness. Viktor never married. He told himself it was because his work left no room for family, no time for domestic life. But he knew the truth. His heart belonged still to Elena, to a woman who had died to save him and countless others. No other could compare to her. No other could fill the space she had left in his soul. On the 10th anniversary of Dracula's destruction, Viktor returned to Transylvania. He wanted to see the ruins of the castle, to pay his respects at the place where Elena had made her sacrifice. The journey stirred old memories, both painful and precious. He passed through villages that had recovered from the vampire's reign, saw children playing in streets that had once been empty and fearful, spoke with people who had rebuilt their lives after decades of terror. When Viktor reached the site of Castle Dracula, he found it overgrown with vegetation. Nature had reclaimed the ruins, covering broken stones with moss and vines. Flowers grew in profusion, where once only death had reigned, bright splashes of color against the grey rubble. It was as if the land itself was healing, transforming a monument to darkness into a garden of life. Viktor climbed over the fallen stones until he reached what had been the Great Hall, the place where Elena had spoken the words of unbinding. He knelt there on the ground and placed his hand against a stone still blackened by holy fire. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember fully, not just the pain of loss but the joy of love, not just Elena's death but her life, her laughter, her courage. "I have lived as you asked," he whispered to her memory. "I have fought the darkness. I have helped others. I have honored your sacrifice by making my life meaningful. I hope wherever you are you can see that. I hope you are proud." A breeze stirred the flowers around him, and Viktor felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. It was as if Elena's spirit touched him for just a moment, a gentle presence that conveyed approval and love and peace. Viktor smiled through his tears, feeling lighter than he had in years. He spent the night camped near the ruins, and in his dreams Elena came to him. She appeared as she had been before the illness, young and vibrant and fully human. She took his hand and walked with him through a landscape of impossible beauty, a place of eternal spring, where flowers never faded and streams ran crystal clear. You have done well, she told him. You have lived with honor and purpose. But Viktor, you must also live with joy. Do not let grief define you forever. I am at peace. You should be too. I try, Viktor said, but I miss you. Every day I miss you. Elena smiled. I know. And I am with you always in your heart, in your memories. But do not mistake memory for presence. I am gone from the world, Viktor. You remain. Live fully while you can. Love again if the chance comes. Do not imprison yourself in the past. Viktor woke as dawn broke, Elena's words echoing in his mind. He understood what she was telling him. He had honored her memory through his actions, but he had also used that memory as a shield against truly living. He had existed rather than lived, going through the motions of life without embracing its possibilities. That day, as Viktor prepared to leave the ruins, he made a decision. He would continue his work as a hunter, but he would also open himself to life beyond that work. He would seek connections with others, allow friendships to deepen, perhaps even allow himself to love again if fate offered that gift. Elena's sacrifice had been meant to give him life, not to chain him to sorrow. Viktor traveled to the village where Elena had been born, a place he had avoided for 10 years. Her mother still lived there, old now and frail, but her eyes sharp. She recognized Viktor immediately when he knocked on her door. You, she said, and her voice held no accusation, only weary sadness. Come in. They sat together by her fire, and Viktor told her everything. He explained how Elena had been transformed, how she had fought against the vampire within, how she had ultimately chosen redemption through sacrifice. He told her that Elena's last thoughts had been of love and peace, that her soul had been purified and freed. Elena's mother wept quietly, her weathered hands clasped in her lap. I always feared what became of her, she said. After she stopped visiting, after the rumors began, I prayed every night that she would find her way back to God. You have given me peace, Viktor. You have shown me that my prayers were answered, even if not in the way I expected. She has a shrine in the village near the castle, Viktor said. The people there call her Elena the Redeemer. They honor her sacrifice and tell her story to their children. Good, the old woman said. That is good. She deserves to be remembered. Before Viktor left, Elena's mother gave him something. It was a small wooden cross, simple and worn, that Elena had owned as a child. Take this, she said. Carry it with you. Let it remind you that faith can survive even the darkest trials. Viktor accepted the cross with gratitude and wore it on a chain around his neck. It became his most treasured possession, more precious than any weapon or relic. Whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm him, whenever darkness seemed too strong, he would touch the cross and remember Elena's courage. The years continued to pass. Viktor aged, but remained strong, his body hardened by constant travel and battle. He saved countless lives, defeated dozens of monsters, and trained a new generation of hunters to continue the work after he was gone. He also allowed himself to form bonds with others, to have friends and companions, to know moments of happiness between the struggles. He never forgot Elena. How could he? She was woven into the fabric of his being, a permanent part of his soul. But he learned to carry her memory without being crushed by it, to let her sacrifice inspire him rather than imprison him. When Viktor was 40 years old, he returned one final time to the ruins of Castle Dracula. He was not alone this time. With him came 3 young hunters he had trained, men and women who had dedicated themselves to fighting darkness. He wanted them to see the place where the greatest evil had been defeated, to understand that no darkness was too strong to overcome if faced with courage and faith. They stood among the flowers that grew in the ruins, and Viktor told them Elena's story in full. He spoke of her transformation and her struggle, of her love and her sacrifice. He explained how one woman's choice had broken a centuries-old curse and saved an entire region from damnation. One of the young hunters, a woman named Maria, who reminded Viktor painfully of Elena, asked a question. "Do you regret it?" she said. "Do you regret accompanying her to meet Dracula that first time? If you had refused, if you had kept her away from the castle, she would still be alive." Viktor considered the question seriously. "I used to regret it," he admitted. "For years I tortured myself with that guilt, But I have come to understand something. Elena made her own choices. I did not force her to seek treatment from Dracula. I did not force her to accept his offer of immortality. Those were her decisions. My only failure was in not recognizing the danger sooner, but even that failure led ultimately to her redemption. If I had kept her away, Dracula would have found another bride. The curse would have continued. Elena's sacrifice saved not just herself but countless others. So no, I do not regret it. I honor it. The hunters nodded, understanding. They remained at the ruins until sunset, then made camp nearby. That night, around their fire, they spoke of their own battles and losses, of the darkness they had faced and the light they had defended. Viktor listened more than he spoke, proud of these young people who had chosen such a difficult path. Before sleep claimed him, Viktor looked up at the stars and thought of Elena. She was out there somewhere, her soul eternal and free, watching over him as she had promised. He touched the wooden cross at his throat and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, "for everything, for your love, for your courage, for showing me that redemption is always possible, even in the darkest circumstances." The wind stirred the trees, and in its whisper, Viktor heard an answer. A voice he had not heard in 20 years but would recognize anywhere. "Live well, beloved. Live fully. And when your time comes, I will be waiting." Viktor closed his eyes, peace settling over him like a benediction. He had fought the darkness. He had honored Elena's memory. He had lived a life of purpose and meaning. When death finally came for him, whenever that might be, he would go without fear, knowing he had earned his rest and would be reunited with the woman who had taught him that love was stronger than death. That faith could overcome any curse, and that even in the deepest darkness the human spirit could shine with the light of redemption. Years later, when Viktor's own end finally came, it was peaceful. He died in a small monastery, surrounded by the hunters he had trained, his work complete and his soul at peace. His last words were of Elena, a whispered declaration of love that crossed the boundary between life and death. The hunters buried him with honor, placing the wooden cross Elena's mother had given him over his heart. They told his story and Elena's story together, two souls bound by love and sacrifice, two lives that had meaning because they had been lived in service of something greater than themselves. And on the night of Viktor's burial, witnesses claimed they saw two lights rise from his grave, intertwining as they ascended toward the heavens. They danced together in the darkness, brilliant and joyful, before finally disappearing among the stars. The village near the ruins of Castle Dracula expanded their shrine to include both Elena and Viktor, calling them the Redeemers, the two who had faced ultimate darkness with ultimate courage. Their story was passed down through generations, told to children as an example of the power of love and faith, a reminder that no evil is so great that it cannot be overcome, no darkness so deep that light cannot penetrate it. The ruins of Castle Dracula remained a garden, flowers blooming year after year without fail. Travelers who passed through the region would sometimes stop there to rest, and they would speak of feeling a strange peace in that place, a sense of hope and healing that defied explanation. Some claimed to see figures walking among the ruins at dusk, a man and a woman holding hands, their forms translucent and glowing with gentle light. Whether these visions were real or imagined, whether Viktor and Elena's spirits truly remained to guard the place of their greatest battle, no one could say with certainty. But this was known and remembered. Their love had endured beyond death. Their sacrifice had freed a land from centuries of terror, and their story had inspired countless others to choose light over darkness, courage over fear, redemption over damnation. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. That was the legacy that would never fade, the story that would never end, the love that had proven itself eternal through the crucible of the darkest imaginable trial. Viktor and Elena, separated by death but united by love, had shown the world that redemption was always possible, that no one was beyond saving, and that the greatest power in all creation was not darkness or evil or immortality, but the simple, profound, transformative power of love offered freely and accepted with courage. Their story ended. Their legend began. And in the hearts of all who heard it, The hope of redemption burned eternal, a light that darkness could never extinguish. A truth that would endure as long as humans told stories and believed in the possibility of salvation. In the ruins of Castle Dracula, flowers continued to bloom. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you might hear laughter on the wind, joyful and free, the sound of two souls finally eternally at peace.